why you should know that Jesus is Lord is, he's a miracle worker. He's done these things, and that should give us more confidence that he is who he says he is.
One of the stories that really stands out in my mind is in the beginning of Mark's gospel, where there's the paralytic man that, he has these 4 friends. They rip open the roof where there was this gathering, and they drop him down into the room because they couldn't get in another way, with the hope that Jesus would be able to heal him. And, I'm sure you remember this story, but, when Jesus, it's interesting in this story because it says when Jesus saw the faith of his friends, which is so interesting. I don't mean for us to dive into that, but I'm just so curious by that, include that statement there. He looked at the paralyzed man and said, "Your sins are forgiven," which is, of course, not why they brought him, right? And the religious crowd, Jesus perceives that they're murmuring, in their hearts, and maybe even quite literally out loud to someone else. Who does this guy think he is to say your sins are forgiven? And that's, of course, a big problem, because who alone but God can forgive sins? I mean, I can forgive you, Matthew, if you offend me. But if sin, when you're looking at someone and you're not talking about a crime they committed against you, you're talking about their sins in general. How can you, unless you're the one being offended by these, unless these are the crimes committed against you, how can you forgive this? So when Jesus says your sins are forgiven, right, he's making a claim to divinity there. He's saying, I am God. So Jesus responds to that crowd and says, why are you upset about this? What's easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or pick up your mat and go home? And I mean, on one hand, it's easier to say your sins are forgiven in that room, because that room is filled with people that will now want to kill you for your claim to be God. So it's not easy in that sense to make that claim. But of course, in the way that they were asking it, and the reader and the hearer of this would understand, which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or pick up your mat and go home? It's way easier to say your sins are forgiven, because how are you ever going to prove that? If you say, pick up your mat and go home, you better be able to heal that man. You're going to look like a fool. Yeah. And it's over. It's over. Yeah. Jesus says your sins are forgiven and walks away. His ministry continues, right? Or his work continues. He says, pick up your mat and go home. And he lays there. Well, okay, here's another fraud, right? This movement's over and done. So the point here, right, is Jesus understood how easy it is to make a claim like, I'll forgive you of your sins. But why should anybody believe him that he actually has the ability to forgive sins? Why should somebody trust Jesus's claim that he has the ability to forgive sins? Well, he gave them a reason right there. And that's what Mark records. Jesus says, but so that you might know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, I say to you, pick up your mat and go home. And he picked up his mat and went home. So there's a reason now that Jesus gave the people, so that they can trust him with a ridiculously huge claim, a claim regarding his divinity. But within that, of course, the claim that I can forgive you of your sins. Why should I believe you, Jesus? Why should I believe you? Well, here's one reason. Pick up your mat and go home. Look, I have this authority. I'm not messing around.
So good. And elsewhere, he says, if you don't believe what I'm saying, look at the miracles that I'm doing and believe on that basis. So he explicitly points to miracles as evidence for why you should believe him. And, it's fascinating when we look at the majority of historians and what they believe about Jesus. One of the facts that isn't talked about, I think, nearly enough about the historical Jesus is that there's large agreement amongst atheist historians, agnostic historians, Christian historians, that he was viewed as a miracle worker by the people of the day. And partially the reason we know this is because look at the enemies of Jesus. They didn't say, oh, he's not a miracle worker, he doesn't do these things. They said, well, we got him on this technicality. He did it on the wrong day, or he used the wrong words, or he made the wrong claim. But they couldn't deny the fact that he was literally raising people from the dead. He was raising the paralytic to be able to walk. He was doing all of these things. And that should give us confidence today. See, I mean, here we are. We're doing some apologetics for you. Here's why you should know that Jesus is Lord. Is he's a miracle worker. he's done these things, and that should give us more confidence that he is who he says he is.
So it just seems to me that, especially if we're talking to Christians here, that the example of to be a follower of Jesus involves giving people reasons to believe in the claim that Jesus is God and he will forgive you of sins. It's what Jesus did. It's what his followers did. And it's what followers of Jesus throughout the centuries have done.